before you go.
Welcome to the candidate forums for the upcoming November midterm election. Before we begin, let's recite the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. On behalf of the Glendale Burbank unit of the League of Women Voters of Greater Los Angeles, I would like to welcome you to our forum for the United States Representative, 30th District. I'm Joan Hardy, a longtime member of the League. Thank you all for being here and for watching online. The League of Women Voters began in 1920 as a group helping women exercise their long-denied right to vote. We are a nonpartisan organization encouraging informed voters and active participation in government. Men have been full members since 1974, and new members are always welcome. We are pleased to collaborate with the City of Glendale in offering this forum in order to help inform and educate voters. Thank you so much to City Clerk, Dr. Susie Arbajian, and to the other wonderful city staff, and especially to the talented staff of Glendale TV. You are always a pleasure to work with, and we appreciate you. At this time, I'd like to introduce our moderator for the forum, Rita Zwern. Rita is a longtime League member and with much experience in moderating forums. We are grateful to Rita, not only for her skill as a moderator, but also for her leadership and guidance in the organization of these forums. Thank you and enjoy.
Good afternoon and welcome to the candidate forum for the 30th Congressional District. The forum is being televised live on cable Glendale TV 6, AT&T UVerse, Channel 99, and repeated at various times prior to the election. The forum will also be available for streaming live, HD, and YouTube MyGlendale channel. Let me begin by saying that attacks of a personal nature, including private matters having no bearing on a candidate's public persona or ability to perform the duties of the office in a competent, ethical manner, will not be tolerated. If a candidate makes a personal attack during his or her remarks, the time required for me to interrupt the candidate and remind him or her of the rule will be taken from his or her own speaking time. The two candidates for the 30th Congressional District are Adam Schiff and G. Maybe a Girl Pudlow, who has requested to be addressed as Maybe. There will be a series of 15 questions during the forum. The first question will be addressed to candidate number 1, who will have 2 minutes to respond. Candidate number 2 will then have 1 minute to respond to the same question. Candidate 2 will then have, the second question will be first addressed to candidate 2, who will have 2 minutes to respond, followed by a 1-minute response by candidate number 1, and so on. Following the question period, the candidates will be given 2 minutes each for a closing statement. During these responses, our timekeepers will alert the candidates to the time remaining with signs of 1 minute, 30 seconds, 15 seconds, and then a stop sign when they are out of time. In order to complete the forum in the allotted time and to ensure fairness, candidates exceeding their speaking time may be put on mute. We will now begin the question period. The first question will be directed first to Mr. Schiff. Now that the Supreme Court has overturned Roe v. Wade, what, if anything, should Congress do about abortion law? Mr. Schiff, your 2-minute response, please.
Well, thank you for the question. First of all, I want to thank the League of Women Voters for hosting this debate and for all the extraordinary work you do every year to educate the public. We're very grateful to you, and I want to thank Maybe for joining in the debate and the conversation here today. In terms of the Supreme Court decision, I think it's important for people to know this was not a decision of a conservative constitutional court. This was a partisan decision by a reactionary court that has, I think, threatened the health care of millions and millions of Americans. Congress should pass a law codifying Roe and its progeny. Indeed, in the House of Representatives, I strongly supported a bill that would do exactly that. That bill passed the House of Representatives, but has not passed the Senate. And the challenge in the Senate is that we don't have enough senators willing to overcome a filibuster in order to protect people's reproductive health care. And so I'm working hard to elect more Democrats to the Senate who are willing to do away with the filibuster in order to codify people's right to reproductive freedom and reproductive health. Finally, because this may be just the first decision by this reactionary court to take away the rights of Americans, I also support legislation to increase the size of the Supreme Court. And I think that the reality is that Mitch McConnell stacked that court, and it ought to be unstacked. And I'm simply not content to have a whole generation of Americans grow up under this reactionary court. So I also think to protect other rights, we need to expand the Supreme Court as well.
Thank you. Maybe your 1-minute response, please.
Thank you so much. And again, thank you also to the League of Women's Voters. Thank you to Representative Schiff for meeting with us. I also am completely pro-choice. I think that women and all people who can become pregnant deserve the right to make their own decisions about how, whether or not they want to become pregnant, if they want to, have an abortion or not. I think abortion rights are something that are sacred to this nation. I think that over the past several decades, we have noticed that I think that folks have believed that this is something that is permanent, and I wish that we would have seen this codified earlier. If elected, that would be one of my first priorities, is to make sure that reproductive rights and the right to an abortion are codified, both for women, for trans men, for non-binary people, for intersex people, and I wouldn't wait 20 years in office to make sure that happens.
Thank you. The next question will be directed first to Maybe. The impeachment of President Clinton and the first impeachment of President Trump raised questions as to what constitutes a high crime or misdemeanor as provided in the Constitution. How might Congress define or clarify this provision apart from proposing an amendment to the Constitution? Maybe your 2-minute response, please.
Thank you. I believe that when it comes to matters like these, I don't think that we should be waiting until they happen to address them. I think that we should be making these decisions beforehand. So, I absolutely believe that Donald Trump should have been impeached. I wish that he would have been convicted and removed from office. I do recognize that he was impeached twice, and I wish that they would have gone through. But I think that the best way to do this is to make sure that we are handling and addressing these issues before they come up, rather than waiting for an issue to happen and then determine, well, how do we decide whether or not this is something that we want to move forward with in terms of removing a president from office. I don't think that anybody is above the law. I think that everybody should be complying with the rules and regulations that the American people put forth. And these should be regulations and laws that are determined by the people and not by a select few. So I would have loved to have seen Donald Trump convicted during his impeachment, and hopefully he does not get reelected in the future.
Thank you. Mr. Schiff, your 1-minute response, please.
Bill Clinton was impeached by Republicans in the House for essentially an extramarital affair, not something related to his conduct of office. And I think that was an abuse of the impeachment process. Donald Trump was impeached twice, the first time for withholding hundreds of millions of dollars in military aid to Ukraine, an ally at war, in order to get Ukraine's help to cheat in his election. And the second time for inciting an insurrection. Both of those impeachments were more than justified. I don't think we need to change the Constitution. I think the problem is that we don't have enough senators who are willing to uphold their oath of office. The president's conduct, Donald Trump's conduct, was clearly impeachable. It didn't require any redefinition of high crimes and misdemeanors. It required merely the senators to live up to their oath of office, and they fell short. And I think it's another indication of just how important character is in office.
Thank you. The next question will be directed first to Mr. Schiff. The Voting Rights Act of 1965, which prohibits racial discrimination in voting, was amended 5 times by Congress to expand its protections. However, beginning in 2013, with the Shelby County versus Holder decision, the Supreme Court has been chipping away at significant pieces of the act and is currently considering a case from Alabama that could result in a further weakening of this landmark legislation. What proposals would you consider to reverse this trend and codify those provisions that have been stripped away by the court? Mr. Schiff, your 2-minute response, please.
Thank you. I'm a strong supporter of the John Lewis voting rights legislation, which would reverse some of those ill-considered decisions and make sure that people are not using the voting process or the redistricting process as a way of disenfranchising people, particularly people of color. I also support H.R. 1, which is an omnibus voting rights legislation that would allow for public financing of campaigns, that would attack the problem of dark money, that would end the gerrymander and bring about a whole host of reforms that I think are vital to protecting the franchise. What we have seen over the last year and a half since January 6th, sadly, is an effort by Donald Trump's enablers to use the big lie that the last election was somehow fraudulent or rigged or stolen to usher in a new generation of Jim Crow laws all over the country, to run out-of-town local elections officials, meritocratic, technocratic elections officials with death threats, to go after people who did their jobs and refused to, quote, find 11,780 votes in the last election that didn't exist, notwithstanding the efforts of the former president to coerce them. And I think we have to recognize that our democracy is at a very vulnerable point in our history. And it is most vulnerable in these attacks on voting rights and the infrastructure of our elections. So those 2 bills, along with a third package that I authored, the Protecting Our Democracy Act, which is essentially our own set of post-Watergate reforms, I think are 3 of the most important omnibus bills to try to protect voting rights and try to essentially reestablish the guardrails of our democracy.
Thank you. Maybe your 1-minute response, please.
Thank you. I firmly believe that one of the hallmarks of democracy is the right to vote and making it as easy as possible for folks to vote. Something that I've seen as a trend over the past several years is especially Republicans trying to make it more difficult for people to be able to vote. Here in California, I really appreciate our system. Everybody gets a ballot in the mail if you're registered to vote. You can either mail that in, you can drop that off at a drop-off box, or you can actually go to the polls to vote. If you visit any Republican states, it's a lot more difficult to vote. You can't do same-day voter registration. You can't do mail-in ballots. And so I want to see a national system of voting rights. I want to see ranked choice voting, and I also want to see publicly funded elections so that we actually not only have people being able to vote, but also having candidates across the class spectrum being able to run for office in the U.S.
Thank you. The next question will be directed first to Maybe. As part of his separate but concurring opinion in Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization, Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas urged the court to go further and reconsider a line of precedents that shield access to contraception, private sexual conduct, and same-sex marriage. Although the majority opinion did not go so far, it was joined by justices who had previously opined that Roe versus Wade was settled law. Are you concerned that other intimate rights could be on the court's future chopping block? And if so, what would you propose to protect them? Maybe your 2-minute response, please.
Thank you. I am absolutely worried about these issues. I don't think anybody a few years ago was thinking that Roe versus Wade was going to be overturned. In fact, even when the conversation started happening, people were still saying, oh, it's not going to happen, not going to happen. It's been precedent for so long. Well, what happened? We saw that a politically skewed Supreme Court actually did take that away. And I am very much concerned about other rights that are going to be taken away, especially from folks in my community. I belong to the LGBTQIA community. I am a trans non-binary person. My pronouns are she, her, they, them. And I think just because of my very existence, people don't want me to exist. They don't not only want me to not be able to marry and be a part of public government, but they don't want me to exist. So this is something that I feel very firmly about, that we have to fight. We have to create legislation before things are suddenly overturned. So we either need to codify things that have already been approved by the Supreme Court, or we need to come up with new legislation via Congress to make sure that the rights of people are not being overturned. And queer people, right now, we are being attacked. We are being killed. We are being victimized. We are being murdered. We are having our rights taken away. Of course, we want to be able to get married, but we're also worrying about our personal safety and being able to exist in this world. So this is something that is absolutely near and dear to my heart. And if elected, I will make sure that we are addressing these issues before anything is overturned.
Thank you. Mr. Schiff, your 1-minute response, please.
I strongly support legislation, and indeed we've taken up legislation in the House, not only to codify Roe and the cases that came after Roe, but also to protect the right to marry, to protect people's right to contraception. Those bills have passed in the House, but again, they have been thwarted in the Senate. Thwarted by, I think, most of the Republicans in the Senate, but also thwarted because, again, too many people in the Senate are adhering to this not constitutionally based rule, this arcane rule of the filibuster. If we're going to truly protect people's rights from a reactionary court like the current Supreme Court and from justices who have written opinions like Justice Thomas, then we're going to need to both do away with the filibuster and I believe we have to change the court. And so, as I mentioned earlier, I think the remedy is first to overcome the filibuster in the Senate, which means that we're going to have to elect more Democrats to the Senate who are willing to do that, and also expand the Supreme Court.
Thank you. The next question will be directed first to Mr. Schiff, which will expound on what you just said. Which proposals, if any, would you propose to change the structure of the Supreme Court and/or the nominations or terms of Supreme Court justices? Mr. Schiff, your 2-minute response, please.
Well, I never, frankly, would have thought a few years ago that I would come to embrace an expansion of the Supreme Court. But then at the same time, I never would have imagined that a Senate leader like Mitch McConnell would withhold even a hearing from a nominee, Barack Obama, for almost a year, a nominee to the Supreme Court. And at the same time, jam a confirmation, in this case of Amy Coney Barrett, while people were literally voting for Joe Biden, voting for a different president. But that's what Mitch McConnell did. He gamed the system. And as a result of gaming the system, there are 2 justices on the Supreme Court who don't belong there. There are more who I don't think belong there based on their partisan and ideological views. But these 2 justices wouldn't be there but for a gaming of the system. And I think the remedy has to be more than wringing our hands about it. I think the remedy ought to be unstacking the court that Mitch McConnell stacked. And that's why I favor expanding the number of justices on the court. I would also, so that we don't continue to have this in the future, where a overly partisan Senate leader can thwart a president from making an appointment to the court, I would have term limits on justices of the court. And I think we can do that constitutionally by making it such that after a justice serves a particular term of years, they're not thrown off the bench, but they would go back to serving on the Court of Appeals or the District Court. I think that would withstand constitutional scrutiny. But I think this is necessary, sadly, given how this process has been abused and the degree to which now we have a Supreme Court that has a very partisan, reactionary, and dangerous agenda for the country.
Thank you. Maybe your 1-minute response, please.
Thank you. I think one area where Representative Schiff and I differ is that I've always believed that we have needed to expand the Supreme Court. I think that 9 people determining the fate of over 300 million people, I think, is too few. I've always believed that the concentration of power in the hands of too few is destructive to democracy. There's just no way that that few of people are going to understand and recognize what everybody else throughout the United States is going through. So having this many people and this few justices, I'm absolutely in favor of expanding the court, and I'm also in favor of term limits. I think that there should be staggered 18-year term limits so that no particular generation is dictating how life is going to be for folks 60, 70 years younger than them.
Thank you. The next question will be directed first to Maybe. Many election officials and experts described the 2020 election as the most secure in American history. Yet many Americans doubt the legitimacy of our elections, and the unfair treatment of election officials by election deniers has contributed to the fact that many elections officials report feeling unsafe because of their job. In the face of these fundamental challenges to our democracy, and in an environment characterized by political polarization, how can we enhance acceptance of American elections and support our elections officials? Maybe your 2-minute response, please.
Thank you. I appreciate that question, especially because I actually was an election official, an election judge when I lived in Chicago in the early 2000s. So I actually participated in the process. I went through the training to become an election judge and maintain the site whenever we were doing elections back in the early 2000s. And, at the time I felt very safe and I felt that things were going smoothly. As I have been reading about what has happened all across the nation with the past election, it's made me very concerned. A lot of these folks who are election judges, these are not, in most instances, these are not elected officials. These are everyday people. These are folks like you and me who essentially are signing up to do a community service to make sure that an election goes through. I very much trust our election system. I think that it's unfair when to lose and suddenly claim, oh, this is not right, there has been fraud. And so essentially I think that we need to have trust in the voting system. I am always in favor of making that system more secure, but I think the way that we can do this is, again, by expanding voting rights rather than contracting voting rights. We want to make it as easy as possible for people to vote, and there are systems in place to prevent people from voting twice, to prevent dead people from voting. You've heard a lot of these these myths about what happened in the last election, and there are very, very few reported cases of actual fraud. Again, I want to expand voting rights, and I also want to make sure that election judges are protected.
Thank you. Mr. Schiff, your 1-minute response, please.
I was on the House floor on January 6th, and at a time when insurrectionists were breaking down the doors and breaking windows to get in, when police had to evacuate us at great cost to themselves. So I take this very personally. And as a member of the January 6th committee, one of our core responsibilities is to propose reforms to try to protect our elections going forward. The former president persuaded millions of Americans of a big lie, that whenever you lose an election, that it's somehow rigged and fraudulent and illegitimate. If you can persuade people that, then what is left but violence? And what we are trying to do on the January 6th committee is demonstrate to the country just how much danger our democracy is in, just how much of a toll these constant attacks on our election workers have played in terms of tearing down our system. I think only by pushing out good information to the American people and rallying around our elections officials can we help safeguard our democracy.
Thank you. The next question will be directed first to Mr. Schiff. President Biden's decision to forgive $10,000 in college debt for those with annual incomes below $125,000 and $20,000 for Pell Grant recipients, while welcomed by many, was not without controversy. What measures would you propose to ease the financial burden for the next generation of college students? Mr. Schiff, your 2-minute response, please.
Thank you. I fully support what President Biden did. In fact, I would have gone further and forgiven up to $50,000 in student debt. The reality is that too many young people are saddled with burdens often for their whole life. We have a lot of senior citizens still paying off their college debt. We have a lot of young people whose career ambitions are curtailed because they can't afford to pursue the careers that they have a passion for because it won't allow them to pay their bills. This is unconscionable. For years, I have been fighting to try to provide much greater support for students, increased Pell Grants, increased affordability for college education. I've introduced legislation to help food insecure students. We have food banks on many of our college campuses because students can't afford even to have nutritious meals while they're in college. And so I think this is a fundamental problem affecting the future of our country, and I'm proud of the action that President Biden took. But I think that to forgive student debt, as laudable as that is kind of a backwards approach. We ought to make sure that students don't have to acquire that debt to begin with, which means we ought to be bringing down the costs of higher education, reducing the fees and the costs for textbooks, the costs for dormitories and other necessities. I spent 10 years after I graduated from law school paying off my debt, and during that decade, my student loan debt was higher than my rent. So I can understand the challenge facing young people, but I went into a profession where I could pay it off, and too many young people can't. And I fully support what the president did. We forgave a lot of PPP loans for businesses, and I think it was appropriate that we forgive student loan debt as well.
Thank you. Maybe your 1-minute response, please.
Thank you. I also am in support of President Biden's move to relieve some student debts. If it were me in that position, I would have canceled all of the student debts. I don't think that anybody should be in debt because of their education. I fully believe that education is a human right that goes from kindergarten all the way through post-secondary school. So many jobs in our economy today rely on having a college degree, and this has been something that has contributed to class division, because you have folks who are able to attain a master's degree, who are able to attain a doctorate degree, and then you have people who aren't. And those are the people who are working class, who are poor, who can't afford student loans. So what I think we should do moving forward, what I think we should have done behind, is eliminate all student debt and make sure that there are free public colleges, both community colleges and state colleges in every single state.
Thank you. The next question will be directed first to Maybe. Increased volatility in weather events has caused many to question the wisdom of rebuilding communities in highly vulnerable areas such as coastlines in Florida and fire-prone communities in California after they've been destroyed or severely damaged. Taxpayer funds used to support rebuilding efforts could be used to relocate residents to safer locations and improve resiliency of remaining infrastructure. Apart from providing emergency relief such as food, water, and hygiene after a major disaster, what should Congress be doing to promote responsible planning for rebuilding in or relocation from those highly vulnerable areas? Maybe your 2-minute response, please.
Thank you. I appreciate that question. And there have been so many weather events lately, and I absolutely am committed to making sure that we are helping all of the communities, not just here on the mainland of the United States, but also places like Puerto Rico to rebuild after disasters. And places like that are not actually being given the same sort of urgency as mainland United States locations. What I also think we need to do is not just help areas that have been impacted by climate change, but we need to be taking very firm, bold, progressive action to prevent these things from happening. It's the same thing with what we were talking about earlier with, preventing the overturn of Roe and the overturn of Dobbs. We don't want to wait until the problem is here. We need to address the problem before it gets here. And our elected officials up until this point have been focused primarily on capitalistic efforts. They've been focused on serving their corporate donors. And so we need to make sure that we are electing officials who are people-powered and not corporate-powered, who are going to vote for things like the Green New Deal and who are actually going to fight for environmental justice. Because the thing is, the folks who are being impacted right now are already marginalized people. The folks who are going to be impacted in the future are also going to be marginalized people. These are Black, brown, Indigenous, people of color. These are queer people. These are poor people. And things are going to get worse and worse. So in the future, we need to be making environmental decisions that don't include voting for renewed oil and gas leases.
Thank you. Mr. Schiff, your 1-minute response, please.
I think the bigger challenge, frankly, than resettling people who have lost their homes is the broader impact of climate change. And I am very proud of what we did in the Inflation Reduction Act. We made the most massive investment in attacking the problem of climate in our nation's history, indeed in any nation's history. Investing in renewable energy, moving ourselves away from a reliance on fossil fuels. I'm also a strong supporter, and have been for years, of the Green New Deal. Indeed, before there was a Green New Deal, I advocated probably 15, 20 years ago that we have an Apollo project-like effort to wean ourselves from fossil fuels. Fossil fuels, I think, are not only a threat to our environment and the planet, but also cultivate a reliance on petro-dictatorships around the world. And we see the benefit the petro-dictatorships, whether it's in Saudi Arabia or in Moscow now, enjoy through their oil wealth. So I think this is an environmental imperative. I think it's an economic imperative. I think it's a national security imperative as well.
The next question will be directed first to Mr. Schiff. Despite the poetic words at the base of the Statue of Liberty, the willingness and ability of our country to open our doors and absorb immigrants and asylum seekers has always been the subject of debate and discriminatory regulation. What would you propose to make our immigration system more equitable for both the immigrants and for those states and municipalities that receive them? Mr. Schiff, your 2-minute response, please.
I'm a strong supporter of the U.S. Citizenship Act, which would provide a pathway for millions and millions of undocumented people to become citizens. I think most urgently, we need to address the danger faced by the Dreamers, and that ought to be, I think, priority number one, particularly in light of the recent court decision that once again puts these young people's lives in jeopardy and insecurity, given that they face the uncertain prospect of whether they can remain in the country. But we need a truly comprehensive approach. And for years we tried to do that. Sometimes we've been successful in getting through the House. Again, we run into the same problem with a filibuster in the Senate. But we need a truly comprehensive approach to this problem. We need an immigration policy that is humane. I was a vigorous opponent of the family separation policies of the former president, which I thought were draconian and inhuman. I think the shameful acts by Governor DeSantis and others to treat migrants as political pawns is atrocious. The reality is, this is a hard problem that needs a comprehensive solution. In the GOP, however, there is no appetite for solving this problem because they like the politics of it. They don't want to solve a problem. They would rather have the problem and politic around it. But the reality is there are good, common sense things we can do to treat people as human beings, understand the vital role that people play as immigrants to this country, and the fact that our country is as successful as it has been over time because people have come here from all over the world. We have to respect that, we have to embrace that, and have an immigration policy consistent with that.
Thank you. Maybe your 1-minute response, please.
Thank you. I would agree with Representative Schiff that family separation is a bad thing. This isn't something that was just happening during the Trump administration. This is something that's actually happening right now in the current administration. So as much as this is a politicized issue, it's not. It's a bipartisan issue. I had the opportunity to ask Representative Schiff one time if he supported the movement to abolish ICE, and in a political manner, he ran around the question many times before eventually saying that no, he doesn't support the effort to abolish ICE. And I have personally spoken with families in the district who have been torn apart because of ICE. And Schiff not only supports ICE, he voted to fund it recently, and he also voted for the Patriot Act in the early 2000s, which created ICE in general.
Thank you. The next question will be directed first to Maybe. Thousands of Afghani translators and others who worked with the Allies during the years-long fighting in Afghanistan have been denied visas to come to the United States for questionable security reasons, despite their loyalty and service being vouched for by the Americans they served. They are now targets for death or imprisonment by the Taliban. How should Congress and the State Department intervene to help or to honor promises made to these much appreciated allies and their families? Maybe your 2-minute response, please.
Thank you. I think in regards to that answer, I think the very easy answer is welcoming more refugees. We need to be welcoming many, many more refugees here in the United States, especially when the United States has, over the past several hundred years, or at least especially in modern history, taken the role of police of the world. Something that really bothers me is the fact that the United States has over 750 military bases across the entire world. I think about what the response would be if other nations tried to set up bases here in the United States. There's an American double standard when it comes to military action, and quite frankly, it's unacceptable. So I think if the United States is going to take on the role of being the police of the world, they also need to take on the role of inviting refugees and making sure that this is a safe place for all folks that are impacted by United States foreign policy. I also want to mention that I am, in general, very anti-military action. I am anti-intervention. I think that we need to focus on American issues, and I don't think we need to be policing the rest of the world in the name of democracy, especially when there are many instances where the United States has not proven to be purely democratic.
Thank you. Mr. Schiff, your 1-minute response, please.
I think this is a real problem. There are a great many interpreters and others that work with and beside our armed forces, with our intelligence community personnel in Afghanistan who continue to be at grave risk. Others that have been evacuated from the country to third countries that have been waiting in a kind of hiatus for admission to the United States. And that is not how we should treat people who risk their lives serving side by side with us. I've been working with Jason Crow, one of my colleagues on the Intelligence Committee, to sponsor legislation to speed up the process, to create additional special visas, to bring more of these brave and courageous people into the country. I have been on the phone with the Secretary of State and the National Security Advisor and others pressing this case since we withdrew from Afghanistan. I think this is a moral obligation, and it also says a lot about who we are if we look after those who stuck out their neck with us, or conversely, if we don't.
Thank you. The next question will be directed first to Mr. Schiff. Among the 11 wealthiest nations, the U.S. healthcare system ranks first in high costs and last on access to care, administrative efficiency, equity, and health outcomes. With news that Medicare is attempting to move further away from the fee-for-service model, more concerns are being raised about the cost versus the access and quality of care to recipients. Where do you stand on healthcare reform? Do you support increased privatization of Medicare? Do you support a single-payer system? If not, what reforms do you support? Mr. Schiff, your 2-minute response, please.
Thank you. I support universal health care and have for many, many years. I think health care is a basic human right. The idea that a family couldn't access quality health care, a parent couldn't provide it for their child, I think simply shouldn't be the case in a country as prosperous as the United States of America. I was proud when we passed the Affordable Care Act. At the time, I championed a public option. We didn't get the public option included in the Affordable Care Act. But nonetheless, we have worked to expand the Affordable Care Act over the years. I'm very proud in the Inflation Reduction Act that we just passed. We provided additional support for people who are enrolled in the marketplaces through the Affordable Care Act. We capped people's out-of-pocket costs for prescription drugs. We brought down the cost of insulin for diabetics. And very significantly, we, for the first time, allowed the federal government to negotiate drug prices to bring the cost of pharmaceuticals down. But we need to go further. I support Medicare for All. I've been a co-sponsor of that for years. I think everyone who would like to be part of Medicare should have a chance to participate in that tremendous system. And I think this is a way that we can get to truly universal care. But we took some powerful steps with the Affordable Care Act. There are now tens of millions of people who have been able to access care that would not have been able to access it otherwise, but there are still many tens of millions more who can't. And those who can access care but can't get it at an affordable price. And I think Medicare for All, allowing people to participate in Medicare is a way of dramatically bringing down the cost of health care.
Thank you. Maybe your 1-minute response, please.
Thank you. I don't believe that expanding health care or just co-sponsoring Medicare for All is enough. We are one of the few nations in the world, one of the wealthiest nations in the world, and one of the very few without universal health care. This is not a pipe dream. This is not a fantasy. This is not something that we cannot afford. We 100% can, and we absolutely need representation in all 50 states, in all 435 U.S. Congress representative seats to make sure that we are demanding universal health care. I come from a background where I haven't been able to afford health care at times. I work part-time at a restaurant, I work part-time as a drag performer, and I work part-time as a Silver Lake Neighborhood Council representative, unpaid. None of those positions provide me health care. Access to me doesn't matter. The fact of the matter is I can't afford it, and so many of my neighbors can't afford it. And these are people of color, these are queer people, these are unhoused people, and we need to make sure that we are demanding universal health care. I also don't trust in...
Thank you.
Okay.
The next question will be directed first to Maybe. Legislation proposed to bar lawmakers in Congress or their family members from trading individual stocks failed to come up for a vote before Congress went into recess and will not be considered until after the midterm elections. What is your position on this legislation? Maybe your 2-minute response, please.
Thank you. I do support that legislation. I support the notion that Congress people should not be owning and trading stocks. This is pretty fundamental in terms of ethics and making sure that we are not electing corrupt politicians. I recognize that my opponent has actually signed on to recent legislation to ban Congress members from owning and trading stocks. So it really makes me wonder why my current congressperson owns and trades stocks, especially in pharmaceuticals. We were just talking about healthcare, and I just don't trust that somebody who is fighting for universal healthcare supposedly would own stocks in pharmaceuticals. It seems fundamentally antithetical to why you would want to own stock and why you would want to pursue universal healthcare. Those are completely opposite ends of the spectrum. So I absolutely support the notion for Congress members not to be able to own stock. I don't own stock. I don't plan on owning stock, whether or not I'm in Congress.
Thank you. Mr. Schiff, your 1-minute response, please.
I think given the recent cases of members of Congress abusing the ability to purchase stock, essentially engaging in illegal insider trading, we should prohibit ownership of stock by members of Congress. The vast majority of what I own is mutual funds, just like millions and millions of Americans. In the reform legislation, members are allowed to own mutual funds. I don't know what pharmaceutical stock my opponent is referring to, unless she's referring to something in a mutual fund. But I think that given the controversy, given the fact that people have engaged in illegal activity, and given the importance of even having the appearance of impropriety, avoiding the appearance of impropriety, I think we should ban the practice of members owning stocks, which is why I'm a co-sponsor of the legislation.
Thank you. The next question will be directed first to Mr. Schiff. The Supreme Court's 2010 decision in Citizens United created loopholes in campaign disclosure rules that have made so-called dark money, funds raised and spent to influence elections by groups that do not disclose their donors, increasingly common. Since that time, dark money groups have spent an estimated $1 billion, mainly on television and online ads and mailers, to influence elections. How significant a problem do you consider this to be, and what, if anything, would you propose to address it? Mr. Schiff, your 2-minute response, please.
I think it's a very serious problem, and indeed, many years ago, for the first time, I introduced a constitutional amendment to overturn Citizens United, and I've been reintroducing that amendment each and every session of Congress. The problem, though, actually goes beyond Citizens United. In the wake of the Watergate scandal, Congress passed a couple of significant reforms in this area. One that put a limit on contributions to candidates, the other put a limit on expenditures on behalf of candidates. The Supreme Court, in a case called Buckley versus Vallejo, struck down the limit on independent expenditures, saying that a contribution to a candidate might corrupt them, and they would uphold that. But equating money with speech and saying that if it wasn't made directly to the candidate, it couldn't corrupt the candidate, and therefore that would be struck down, the ban or the limit on expenditures. As a result, we have this crazy system now where someone may be limited in giving $2,900 to a candidate, but can spend $29 million on behalf of that same candidate as long as they do it so-called independently of the candidate. That's a fiction. The amendment that I introduced would overturn that whole line of court decisions. It would allow Congress to reimpose limits on expenditures. It would allow us to do away with dark money, these anonymous expenditures. It would also provide a mechanism where states could adopt public financing of elections. I consider this such a danger to our democracy, the health of our democracy, this flooding of dark money, that I think that amending the Constitution is an appropriate remedy. I would also say, again, expanding the court is also a potential remedy, because a different court might take a different view of Citizens United.
Thank you. Maybe your 1-minute response, please.
Thank you. I'm in agreement that I would absolutely overturn Citizens United. I don't think we need dark money in politics. I don't think we need corporate money in politics. I'm a people-powered candidate. My campaign raised only about less than $30,000, and we've made it this far to make it to the general election. I'm up against somebody who has about $17 million raised in this particular election cycle, and I can tell you that's not all from individuals. There is a lot of corporate PAC money in there. And so I think when you are somebody who is introducing legislation, you need to not only talk the talk, but walk the walk. And so I would love to see Representative Schiff reject all corporate funding and only accept money from individuals, which has not been the case.
Thank you. The next question will be directed first to Maybe. In response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, Sweden and Finland have applied for membership in NATO, applications which appear to be on the fast track for approval. Following Russia's extra-legal annexation of 4 eastern regions of Ukraine, Ukraine submitted its own application for NATO membership. However, approval requires the consent of all 30 member countries, and at present for Ukraine, that is not certain. Would you be in favor of the United States supporting Ukraine's bid to join NATO? Why or why not? Maybe your 2-minute response, please.
Thank you. You know what Ukraine decides to do in terms of NATO membership is up to Ukraine. I don't think that the United States should say whether or not that happens. In fact, I'm personally in favor of the United States thoughtfully and considerately pulling out of NATO. Again, I think that the United States has tried to be the police of the world for far too long. We have over 750 military bases across the world. And ultimately, I think the more and more we contribute to military intervention or the support of military intervention, the closer we get to World War III. You know, right now what's happening in Ukraine, I think, is an atrocity. I support Ukrainians. I don't support the war whatsoever. What I do support is, you know, I support economic and aid that is not military. I support sending over food, water, helping with shelter, helping with refugee status, helping with medical aid. The closer and closer we get to putting our noses into those matters, the more and more we're going to agitate Russia and eventually lead to World War III. I want us to stay as far away from that as possible, while also helping our allies who are vulnerable, helping our neighbors who are being disrespected, who are being attacked. But I don't think the answer is supplying arms or military training or saying whether or not somebody should be able to join NATO.
Thank you. Mr. Schiff, your 1-minute response, please.
I think that Ukraine has the right of self-determination, and if Ukraine wants to be a part of NATO, they should have every right to pursue membership in NATO, and I would support their ability to do so. It will ultimately be a decision for NATO whether Ukraine meets all of the requirements, but we can't have a situation where some other country, in this case Russia, gets to dictate who becomes a member of NATO or who partners with the West in terms of their collective security. I fully support the Ukrainians' aspiration to live in peace, to have the right of territorial integrity, to have their own sovereignty, to expel the Russian invaders. I think what Putin is doing is committing war crimes in Ukraine with the indiscriminate bombing of civilians and hospitals and apartment buildings. And I think we got to continue to provide Ukraine with every support, including support their aspirations, whether it's the European Union or NATO.
Thank you. Now, the next question, each candidate will have 2 minutes to address this final question, for which we will reverse the order. Why are you running for Congress, and what distinguishes you from your opponent? Maybe your 2-minute response, please.
Thank you, and I appreciate y'all revealing this last question to us in advance. It really gave me some time to put some thought and consideration into this, especially because this is something that I have been asked, challenging somebody who has been in office for over 20 years. So I've prepared a few words. I'm challenging Representative Schiff because I believe Los Angeles, Burbank, Glendale, and West Hollywood deserve actual progressive representation. Schiff has been in office since I was 14 years old. I'm 36 now, and I've witnessed the district become materially worse. Homelessness is skyrocketing, the rent is too damn high, and we still don't have a federally mandated livable wage. We're struggling to afford health care and education while simultaneously worrying about World War III. Why do we keep electing the same representation then? While many folks believe Schiff is a progressive based on his opposition to Donald Trump, his voting record proves otherwise. Opposing Trump is the lowest bar in progressive politics. During his tenure as California state senator, Schiff was an architect of mass incarceration and not only voted for but actually authored legislation to increase incarceration in California that mostly impacted juveniles and Black and Indigenous and people of color. As a congressman, he's been the very definition of a war hawk, having voted for the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, the Saudi invasion of Yemen, which is still one of the worst humanitarian crises in the world, the Patriot Act, which has dissolved our civil liberties, and for every annual defense budget since 2001, which is getting close to $1 trillion annually. Meanwhile, he's accepted hundreds of thousands of dollars in campaign donations from weapons manufacturers and defense contractors. I believe California District 30 deserves a community-driven leader who rejects corporate influence and works for the people, someone who will fight for universal health care, housing for all, environmental justice, racial justice, LGBTQIA rights, reproductive rights, alleviating homelessness, and staying out of war. If elected, I commit to bringing that kind of leadership to our communities. The status quo is designed to serve the status quo, not the rest of us struggling to survive. Schiff may tell you to vote for him because of his his experience, but it's for that very reason that I believe it's time for him to be replaced by someone who will put
thank you.
people over
Thank you.
profits.
Mr. Schiff, your 2-minute response, please.
Well, let me just conclude by thanking you again for hosting our discussion today. Greatly appreciate the way, the civility, and the thoughtfulness that has gone into this forum. I'm very proud of my work in Congress, very proud to have served my constituents as long as I have. My work is not done. I want to make sure that the economy is working for everyone. That is my top priority. And the reality is that it's not working for tens of millions of Americans. For all too many Americans, for all too many of my constituents, their quality of life is less than what their parents enjoyed, and the quality of life for their children looks to be less than what they're enjoying now. I got into politics because I wanted to be part of that multi-generational compact that we leave the planet and our country and our community better off than what we inherited. But our democracy is at risk right now. Our economy is not working for millions of people. We have a huge divide that has grown between the rich and the poor. People feel they have no safety net. And I am singularly focused on making sure that the economy, it works for everyone, that everyone who works hard has a chance to succeed, that they can put a roof over their head, that they can provide food for their family, and that they can get by and enjoy the American dream. I also want to make sure that my kids, and one day when they have kids, their kids will live in a democracy. And right now, our democracy is at grave risk. And I'm very proud of the work that I've done to protect our democracy. And that work is not over. The sad reality is that a year and a half after January 6th, our democracy is more at risk today than it was then. And we need people who are champions of democracy. And that doesn't mean just championing things on social media. That's easy to do. It's easy to criticize, easy to complain on social media. It's hard to actually get things done. I'm very proud of what I've gotten done to hold Donald Trump accountable, but more than that, to propose proactive legislation to protect our democracy.
The candidates will now have 2 minutes each for their closing statements. Mr. Schiff, your closing statement, please.
During this session of Congress, I think we've had an extraordinary record of success. We passed a rescue plan that literally rescued millions and millions of jobs, that helped a lot of small businesses, including restaurants, keep their doors open, that speeded getting vaccinations into people's arms and saved countless lives from this pandemic. We passed legislation recently to finally address the scourge of gun violence. But I believe we need to go much farther. I want to see a ban on assault weapons. I want to see truly universal background checks. We also passed legislation, the Inflation Reduction Act, to bring down healthcare costs, to bring down the price of prescription drugs. We passed legislation, the first in years, probably the most significant investment in infrastructure since the Eisenhower administration. We passed the most significant investment in attacking climate change in history. It is I think, unparalleled record of success, but there is so much more work to be done. I want to continue that work. As I was saying, the principal focus for me is preserving our democracy and making sure that we have an economy that works for everyone. And we have a lot of work to do to make sure that's the case. There are too many parts of the country, too many parts of our own community where people are working full-time, they're working more than one job, and they still don't have enough to get by. They're just one medical emergency, one car accident, or one car problem away from failing. And we need to make structural changes to address that problem with our economy so that everyone can get by and everyone can succeed. And I thank people for their support, and I ask for your vote again in the November election. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Maybe your closing statement, please.
Thank you so much. It's a very exciting moment for me to be here today. I started running for Congress almost 4 years ago, and I decided to run because I was dissatisfied with the representation in my district. I am a person of the district. I'm a working class person. I'm one of the people that Representative Schiff described who's working multiple jobs. I work part-time at a restaurant. I work part-time as a drag performer, and I also work part-time as a volunteer community advocate on the Silver Lake Neighborhood Council. And it's not enough to just want to help your community. You have to really be a part of your community. I mentioned earlier that if I'm elected, I will be a community-driven leader, because that is what I am right now. I have been serving on the Silver Lake Neighborhood Council for almost 4 years. I've served on the Homelessness Committee. I have served on the Budget and Finance Committee. I'm currently the treasurer of the Neighborhood Council, and I've done a lot of mutual aid efforts to help my community. I have helped to create a program for free produce boxes for food insecure people. I've helped to establish the community fridge in my neighborhood. And these are things that I want to see on a large scale if I'm elected. There are so many areas where the government is not actually helping, and we need a lot of mutual aid efforts to step in. And so I want to see the government take over those areas so that mutual aid efforts are not required. You know, when we talk about you know, bringing healthcare changes and bringing environmental changes. If I'd been in office for 20 years and all I was able to say was I voted to bring down healthcare costs when I promised to bring you universal healthcare, I would expect you to vote me out. If I ran on environmental justice and I voted for a bill that actually increased oil and gas leases, I would expect you to vote me out. So I think it's time that we bring in people-powered representatives and leave out the corporate-powered status quo folks that have been in office for over 20 years. And I hope that you will consider me for your vote, because there's 2 Democrats on the ballots. There's no risk in taking a vote for me. If I lose, you're going to still have the incumbents. But please, I'm asking you to take a chance on me.
Thank you. That concludes our candidate forum. Our thanks to the candidates and the volunteers for your participation in this evening's forum. We're also grateful to Brian Halloran, broadcast coordinator, Glendale TV, and his staff for their valuable support in making this event possible. Please be sure to vote, whether in person or by mail, so that your ballot is received or postmarked by November 8th. And remember, it's the votes, not the polls, that count. Thank you.
to the candidate forum for the California Assembly 44. I'm Joan Hardy, member of the League of Women Voters of Greater Los Angeles. The redistricting process that occurs every decade has resulted in 2 California Assembly districts within the city of Glendale. The new California Assembly districts representing Glendale are numbered 44 and 52. All the candidates for the 2 districts were invited. Since one of the members for District 52 declined the invitation due to a scheduling conflict, and the League does not do single chair candidate forums, the forum for District 52 had to be canceled. But we are grateful for the participation of the candidates for District 44. This forum represents democracy in action, and we're very happy that you're here. The League encourages voters to not only vote themselves, but to reach out to family members and friends and encourage them to vote as well. Be an ambassador to voting by helping others exercise their right to vote. If you're interested in empowering voters and defending democracy, please consider joining the League of Women Voters of Greater Los Angeles. The questions you will be hearing today are questions we have received from League members and the public. We hope the candidates will find these questions to be challenging, enabling you, the voters, to make an informed decision. Now I would like to introduce our moderator, Rita Zwern. Rita is a longtime League member with much experience in moderating forums. We are immensely grateful to Rita and for the many hours that she dedicates to the League. Thank you and enjoy.
Thank you, Joan. Good afternoon and welcome to the Candidate Forum for the 44th Assembly District. The forum is being televised live on cable Glendale TV, A&T Uverse, Channel 99, and repeated at various times prior to the election. The forum will also be available for streaming live HD and YouTube MyGlendale channel. Let me begin by saying that attacks of a personal nature, including private matters having no bearing on a candidate's public persona or ability to perform the duties of the office in a competent, ethical manner, will not be tolerated. If a candidate makes a personal attack during his or her remarks, the time required for me to interrupt them and remind him of the rule will be taken from his or her own speaking time. The 2 candidates for the 44th Assembly District are Laura Friedman and Barry Curtis Jacobson. There will be a series of 12 questions during the forum. The first question will be addressed to Candidate 1, who will have 2 minutes to respond. Candidate 2 will then have 1 minute to respond to the same question. The second question will be addressed to Candidate 2, who will have 2 minutes to respond, followed by a 1-minute response by candidate number 1, and so on. Following the question period, the candidates will be given 2 minutes each for a closing statement. During these responses, our timekeepers will alert the candidates to the time remaining with signs of 1 minute, 30 seconds, 15 seconds, and then a stop sign when they are out of time. We'll now begin the question period. The first question will be directed first to Ms. Friedman. Senate Bill 1338, the CARE Court, which stands for Care, Assistance, Recovery, and Empowerment, bill was signed into law on September 14th. This program will connect people in crisis with a court-ordered treatment plan while diverting them from possible incarceration or homelessness. While lauded by city leaders and family members, many counties have expressed concerns that sufficient housing, outreach, and mental health resources may not be available by the October 2024 implementation deadline. What steps, if any, would you propose be taken by the state to ensure the success of this program. Ms. Friedman, your 2-minute response, please.
And thank you for the question, and I want to thank the League for hosting this forum today, and I want to also thank my opponent for his service to our nation and the military. I am fully in support of the Care Court program, and I voted for this measure when it was before me in the Assembly. And in fact, I've run bills for 2 or 3 years in a row about conservatorship for our mentally ill homeless population. I think that it's not humane to watch people die on the streets. I think that it's very dangerous for us to normalize tent cities and encampments. And I do believe that we need to offer people who are in crisis a much better support system. And that includes medical interventions, it includes mental health care, it includes housing. It has to include everything that those individuals need to become stabilized and to become functioning members of society. Right now, we have, even though we've put billions of dollars in the state into fighting homelessness, we just haven't put enough resources into that kind of support system and long-term care. And I do believe, I agree with the counties that we need to better resource this, but I'm also confident that Governor Newsom, given that this was one of his signature priorities this year, is willing to help resource where necessary, and that will certainly be the next step for the legislature. But we need to work in conjunction with our counties. We also need to have metrics for success, and we need to hold them accountable, which is something that I think has been lacking in a lot of our response when it comes to homelessness. Thanks again for the question.
Thank you. Mr. Jacobson, your 1-minute response, please.
Well, thank you first to the League for inviting us and my opponent for joining us here. The mental health crisis goes back a long ways. In 1968, we de-incarcerated a lot of mental patients throughout the United States. In the succeeding generations since then, very little has been done about the mental health issue. You have the homeless falling into 2 categories, broadly speaking. You have those who are mentally ill, schizophrenic, bipolar or otherwise, who are supposed to be getting their meds as an outpatient. Of course, they never did. And then you have those that are simply drug addicted, alcoholic. Often they aged out of the foster care system. We need to build more facilities for the mentally ill. We need to find ways and pass laws that'll get them off the street. We're not doing them any favors, and it's certainly not humane to leave them on the street where they are.
Thank you. The next question will be directed first to Mr. Jacobson. In August of this year, the California Air Resources Board mandated that by 2035, all new cars and light trucks sold in California must be zero-emission vehicles. Additionally, the legislature has approved significant allocations for clean vehicle purchase rebates, special financing, and additional charging infrastructure. What additional proposals would you put forth, if any, regarding electric vehicles? Mr. Jacobson, your 2-minute response, please.
Well, the first thing we'll need to do if we're going to go to all electric vehicles, which I don't believe is a good idea, I think it's very wrong-headed, is to improve the power grid. We can't even supply enough power for the EVs we have currently, which is about 3% of the cars in California, when we have a particularly hot day. So when we have power surges, the governor tells us to stop using our electric cars, stop charging our electric cars. It's been estimated we need to build, in the next 13 years, 20 nuclear power plants just to supply the needs for powering that many electrical vehicles. So it's a wrong-headed proposal. We do not have the grid to support it. And certainly asking trucks, diesel trucks, which carry the load throughout the United States, some which are interstate, to become EVs, which is another proposal down the road, is just a silly idea. At this current point, fossil fuel is the only answer. We're not ready to go to a full electric grid. There's nowhere to charge these vehicles. Where are the power stations going to come from? And ultimately, the power that powers these electric cars comes from coal-powered fire plants. So unless we're willing to spend the money and the time to improve the power grid, going to an all-EV car fleet in California is a nonsensical idea.
Thank you. Ms. Friedman, your 1-minute response, please.
I absolutely support the goal of moving to all zero-emission vehicles by 2035, and that would be for new car sales. It's going to take us, unfortunately, longer to move existing cars and used cars out of the equation, but our air quality demands it. The health of our children demand it. And yes, we do have to upgrade our power grid. There's no question about that, but we do have the time and the resources to do that. You know, California's never been afraid of the future. We've always embraced the future, and this is where the whole world is going. The amount of EVs that are being released now by all of the major automakers tells us that. We have car companies like Audi saying that they're not going to produce any more internal engine vehicles after just a few years, in fact, ahead of California's goals. So we know this is where the industry is going. We're making those investments now across the state and infrastructure, and the power grid is also something that we're currently upgrading.
Thank you. The next question will be directed first to Ms. Friedman. It has been projected that due to the accelerating impacts of the warming climate on our water supply, our existing water supply may be markedly diminished as early as 2040. Over the last 3 years, the state has earmarked more than $8 billion to modernize water infrastructure and management. Proposal to ensure water supplies for the future include creation of storage space for stormwater, recycling of wastewater, conservation, and desalination of ocean water. Which of these proposals do you believe hold the most promise, and how would you prioritize them for funding in the state budget? Ms. Friedman, your 2-minute response, please.
Thank you. I love talking about water resources. I served for several years on the Metropolitan Water District Board of Directors, and when I came into the legislature, spent my first 2 years working on landmark water efficiency legislation with the Brown administration. So this is an area that I love talking about. I'm kind of a water wonk. So I think that we need a diversified portfolio, certainly, and we have that in California. But in terms of what we should be putting a lot of our investment in, I do believe potable reuse for our area is one of the most important resources that we need to continue to invest in. One of the challenges with climate change is that it's changing our hydrology. It's changing it in terms of where rain is falling. And even though we have modeling, it's going to be hard to really predict where and when rain's going to fall. So we definitely need storage, and I support the Sites Reservoir up in Northern California and other large storage projects. But look at our existing storage. So much of it is almost empty because we just haven't had the snowpack and the rainfall in the places that we've wanted. And this is something that's probably, unfortunately, only going to get worse. Going back to your car question, we need to certainly try to slow climate change as much as we can, but we also have to make sure that our investments are resilient. And potable reuse is going to be a huge part of the equation. The problem with ocean desalination is that it's extremely expensive and energy intensive, which is why it becomes difficult to make it pencil out. People don't want to pay that much in water, and I don't blame them. We have to be a lot more efficient, and I would say investing a lot of resources in water efficiency so that we have the water that we want to take our showers and keep our vegetable gardens green without wasting the amount of water that we currently waste through leaky irrigation systems, through inefficient appliances. The fact that so many of us have to run our tap before we get hot water for a minute or two, that's all wasted water that we could save by investing more in efficiency. So I think it's an all of the above kind of answer.
Thank you. The next question will be directed first to Mr. Jacobson. On September 18th.
Excuse me, we'll get a chance to rebut that.
Oh, I'm sorry. Mr. Jacobson, your 1-minute response, please. I'm sorry.
Thank you. And I agree with an all hands on deck sort of approach. Everything needs to be done to reclaim as much water as we can. Every year it rains. Every year the water rushes right down the storm drains and into the ocean. When the snow melts, it goes right down the rivers and the watershed right into the ocean. We need to capture that water, reclaim it, clean it, put it back in the aquifer, put it back into the reservoirs. That's something that's been a problem my entire life. I've lived in California since I was born here, and nothing's ever been done. So I'm all in favor of that. I disagree with my opponent, with Laura, because desalination's been done in Israel, Saudi Arabia, the Gulf states for generations. It is could be when we have the Pacific Ocean, the largest body of water right next to our state. That's an obvious answer to our water needs.
Thank you. Now the next question will be directed to Mr. Jacobson. On September 18th, Governor Newsom signed measures to strengthen California's cannabis laws and expand the legal market. However, local opposition and rigid bureaucracy continue to pose challenges to the market and consumers, while the illegal market continues to flourish and draw a criminal element to local communities. In addition, Proposition 64 downgraded illegal cultivation from a felony to a misdemeanor, reducing the legal jeopardy for illegal growers. What steps do you believe should be taken to protect and expand the legal cannabis market while also putting a stop to illegal, unsafe operations? Mr. Jacobson, your 2-minute response, please.
Well, one thing that's very disturbing is that the Mexican cartels have gotten into the California cannabis growing business. They're diverting water from the aquifer to their own crops. I'm not against in any way the use of cannabis if that's what an adult wants to do. We need to take better and stronger steps to make sure that illegal cartels are not trafficking in this and other illegal drugs. But I'm much more concerned with fentanyl, which is killing our teenagers particularly, IV drug use, which is being pushed to our homeless. The idea of giving our homeless clean needles as an answer is a nonsensical equation here. So there's lots of things that need to be done, but cannabis I don't think really is the problem, other than keeping illegal cartels from entering that market.
Thank you. Ms. Friedman, your 1-minute response, please.
So the question being about the legal cannabis market and the challenges that they have with the illegal competition, I think that is a real issue in the state. And in some parts of the state, in sort of our rural areas and in Northern California, there have been murders of park rangers who have stumbled onto illegal grows. So I think this is a real issue for law enforcement, and I do believe that there should be the flexibility to charge large illegal growers as a felony. I wouldn't have supported that downgrading, if you will. And I do think that local governments need the ability to control what happens within their own cities in terms of both legal and illegal cannabis shops. And I know in the city of Los Angeles, it's been a real enforcement issue for them. But there's no way, the best way to help the legal market is to make sure that we shut down the illegal operators.
Thank you. The next question will be directed first to Ms. Friedman. Governor Newsom has championed California as a sanctuary state for those seeking abortion. In August of this year, state lawmakers authorized the spending of millions of dollars to support people who travel from other states because abortion is illegal or severely restricted where they live. Do you support or oppose these actions, and why or why not? Ms. Friedman, your 2-minute response, please.
Well, abortion and reproductive rights are a core value to me. I grew up going to abortion rights rallies with my mother way back in the day in South Florida when I was a child. And this is something that's deeply shaped my politics. And to see those rights being rolled back are beyond troubling to me. I mean, my mother's 82 now, and she can't believe that the rights that she fought so hard for are now being threatened the way that they are. I absolutely support the entire abortion rights package that was passed by the legislature. And in fact, I was a co-author of every single one of those measures. And I fully support Proposition 1 to enshrine the right to an abortion in the California Constitution. I think that we do need to help women in other states who are, look, you're not going to stop women from having abortions. What they're stopping is the access to safe abortions. We have 2 members, current serving members of the state legislature, who both lost their grandmothers to illegal abortions when abortion was illegal. Those are the times that we're referring to. And this burden does not fall equally on people. We know that minority women and economically disadvantaged women are the ones who are going to be locked out of accessing their basic health care. So I absolutely don't support forced pregnancies. I support women's rights to make a very personal decision. And I say this, by the way, as a mother whose daughter came to her through adoption. And I prayed every day for somebody to give us that chance to become parents. But I would never for a second dream of taking away any woman's right to make that decision for herself and for her family.
Thank you. Mr. Jacobson, your 1-minute response, please.
So I am in favor of abortion up to a certain point. I think there has to be a cutoff point where the mother has to make a decision. We're talking about 2 lives, not just the mother's, but the baby in the womb. At the point in which a baby becomes, it has a heartbeat, it has a fully functioning nervous system, albeit it's not fully developed, wherever that point is determined scientifically, that's where we should start thinking about putting a limit. Other than for the life of the mother, such as a pregnancy where the mother's life be in danger. So my cutoff point would be somewhere in the area between 15 and 20 weeks. Other than that, abortion should be fully legal.
Thank you. The next question will be directed first to Mr. Jacobson. California's population of unhoused people increased by 42% between 2014 and 2020, while the rest of the country had a 9% decrease. In addition to having one of the most expensive and fastest growing housing markets, other factors exacerbating the house supply shortage include single-family zoning, local opposition to housing, and a protracted and expensive permit process. Are you in favor of the state overriding local land use rules to grant new building rights to landowners? And if not, what other steps do you think the state should take to stop and reverse this decades-long problem? Mr. Jacobson, your 2-minute response, please.
Well, the problem is we have a place where everyone wants to live. Obviously, California has got the best weather in the country. It's a beautiful state to live in. Prices have always been expensive. I differ with Laura, and she believes, I think, in the opposite of what I believe, which is that you shouldn't be giving the power to the state to determine these things. It's got to be done locally. These are community decisions the cities are best qualified to make. So I'm against multifamily dwellings being placed in single-family dwelling neighborhoods. It's one thing to have a mother-in-law apartment in the back of your home. It's another thing for developers to turn that into a 5, 6, or 7 person apartment, especially without parking being developed right along with that, so there's proper parking. So I differ with my opponent in a couple areas when it comes to these sort of things, but again, it should be a local decision. It should be left up to the cities.
Thank you. Ms. Friedman, your 1-minute response, please.
Thanks. Well, I have a lot of respect for local control. In fact, I'm sitting on a dais where I served for almost 8 years as a Glendale City Council member and mayor. So I understand how important that local decision making is, and being able to do the kind of planning that you need that builds communities right from within your city with the help of your community members. On the other hand, we have a statewide housing crisis, and the response has to be statewide, which means that cities can't just choose to sit it out and not add housing, particularly in areas where they already are existing job centers. And what happens is you push people further and further away. So I do think that the cities should be making the decisions about where that housing goes, and my votes and my work have supported that. But that doesn't mean that they can say that they're not going to develop at all, particularly when they have infill areas that are underdeveloped and where they're attracting a lot of jobs. So many of these cities grow during the day, and people are having to live in Santa Clarita and San Bernardino, and that's bad for the environment and certainly bad for people's quality of life.
Thank you. The next question will be directed first to Ms. Friedman. The California SMARTER Plan, which stands for Shots, Masks, Awareness, Readiness, Testing, Evaluation, and RX, is the next phase of California's COVID-19 response, which aims to use the lessons of the last 2 years to prepare for future COVID-19 or variants. The state's $3.2 billion emergency response package includes $1.9 billion to immediately equip California's healthcare system with supplies and staffing. What other measures should the state be taking to ensure that we are better prepared for the next pandemic? Ms. Friedman, your 2-minute response, please.
Well, if COVID showed us one thing, it showed us the holes that are in our healthcare system in California. And we need to look at this very holistically. I mean, long before we had COVID, we had people that were underinsured, people who lacked insurance. I myself was fully insured with Blue Cross health insurance. When I got breast cancer, I still had $9,000 in co-pays and out-of-pocket expenses that year. That was really difficult for me to pay, and that's somebody with good insurance. So we have a lot of work to do to make sure that everybody has access to health care in this state. I would like to see us move towards universal health care for sure, because we have learned through the pandemic that we are all only as healthy as the least healthy among us. And we have to make sure that everybody always has access to excellent care and that they feel they can access it whenever they need it. So I'd say the first step is to be more serious about ensuring that everybody has health care that they can afford. And right now, even with Covered California, we're not completely there yet. We also need to make sure that we support our medical professionals and that we are developing more nurses, more doctors, more medical professionals. Far too many of our hospitals were understaffed during the pandemic, and when they were competing for professionals with hospitals from around the country, we saw that this is a nationwide problem. And it was very stressful for healthcare workers, and they weren't being given the time that they needed, the support, because they were in such short supply. So we need to support our doctors and our nurses, and I'm happy to say that all the nurses associations are supporting my candidacy. I've worked very closely with the nurses and the medical professionals since I've been in the legislature, and I work closely with all of our hospitals. And our district, I have to say, is very rich with hospital resources. We have excellent hospitals here in the 44th Assembly District, and we need to make sure that they stay supported financially and through the work of the community.
Thank you. Mr. Jacobson, your 1-minute response, please.
Well, I run a healthcare clinic. We stayed open during COVID. We now treat a lot of long COVID patients. These are patients suffering from COVID after effects, if you will. The healthcare system has a lot of flaws. I'm the first one to say that the insurance system we currently have has holes in it that need to be filled. I'm not for a single-payer system. I'm for improving the current system we have. But without a doubt, there's definitely some problems with our healthcare system that need to be worked on.
Thank you. The next question will be directed first to Mr. Jacobson. In August, California received $230 million in grants from the Federal Department of Transportation to help build the state's fleet of low and no emission public transit vehicles. This investment will help combat climate change and improve the air quality in our communities. But the next challenge will be finding ways to encourage and incentivize the public to increase their use of public transportation. What proposals would you make in this effort? Mr. Jacobson, your 2-minute response, please.
Well, I'm not sure I agree with the premise. I don't think that public transportation is for everyone. It certainly has a place. I'm a believer in automobiles as the personal conveyance. I'm not a believer in bicycles, except as a recreational vehicle. You don't take your mother to her doctor's appointment on a bicycle. You don't take her to a medical appointment on a bus. You need a car. You need a car to take your kids to soccer. You're not gonna put your kids on a bus and send them to the soccer practice that way. So, I think that move is wrong-headed. Reducing emissions is a great idea. We're already 16 times cleaner than we were when I lived here and grew up here in the 1960s. Air quality is tremendously better. There comes a point where there is diminishing returns. And while I'm all for electrical vehicles being part of the fleet, I'm all for public transportation, there comes a point where it gets silly trying to push everybody into it.
Thank you. Ms. Friedman, your 1-minute response, please.
A lot of people in Los Angeles take their mothers to the doctor on a bus. A lot of people in Los Angeles can't afford to own and operate a car. A lot of people choose to not have a car. That expense is overwhelming for people who are already rent burdened. And they deserve nothing less than an excellent public transportation system. It's not only a question of climate change, it's a question of equity and basic fairness and quality of life for everybody. We are already paralyzed by traffic congestion in Los Angeles. As we grow as a community, as we grow as a city, the only way to give everybody the quality of life they deserve and the chance and to live the way they want, to not have to spend so much of their income on a car, is to give them a much better and much more robust, safe public transportation system. And that's something that's worth the state investing in.
Thank you. The next question will be directed first to Ms. Friedman. Between April 2020 and January 2022, 352,000 California residents moved to other states. While the state's population increased by 5.8% from 2010 to 2020, this was below the national growth rate of 6.8% and resulted in a loss of a congressional seat in 2021 for the first time in the state's history. A significant increase in remote work opportunities, coupled with the cost of living, extremely high housing prices, and a desire for a better work-life balance, has driven many to leave the state. What do you believe the state should be doing to reverse this trend? Ms. Friedman, your 2-minute response, please.
Well, putting aside whether or not we should be encouraging people to stay or encouraging people to leave, I do think that the cost of living is far too high in California. Certainly what tops everybody's list for most people is the cost of rent and housing. I mean, I've heard this from people I know, I've heard it anecdotally. I have personal friends who left the state because their rents went up and up and up, particularly in cities that don't have rent control. And if you can live somewhere that's cheaper, where you can pay half the rent you're paying right now in California and work remotely, a lot of people are going to take advantage of that. And it's not just California. There are a lot of urban centers that have also been losing population into smaller communities for a variety of reasons. So I believe that we need to lower the cost of rent, not just because we want to keep people here, but because people are spending too much on rent. And people can't afford it, and people are not saving for their kids' college. They're not able to save for a medical emergency. They're not able to save for their own retirements. So part of that is increasing our available housing stock, absolutely, and preserving what affordable housing we do have. We used to have a way of building affordable housing in California through our redevelopment agencies. Before I went onto the legislature, because of their budget situation, they did away with the redevelopment agencies. And cities like Glendale, almost overnight, poof, the lion's share of the money that they used to build affordable housing disappeared. And it's been slowly trickling back, but not with the kind of regularity that we need to actually provide subsidized affordable housing for the people that we need it. I have done a lot of work on housing policy over the past several years, and I do think it's something that's a state interest. We can't leave everything to local governments, because that's what led to this. We have got to make sure that all localities build enough housing for their residents, to keep people off the streets, to allow people's children to have the chance to live in the community that they grew up in. For so many reasons, we have to have a bed for every head.
Thank you. Mr. Jacobson, your 1-minute response, please.
Well, California's always been an expensive place to live, and it's getting worse, no doubt about it. We lost 117,000 residents last year. In 2020, we lost 260,000 residents and taxpayers. Many of these were high-income taxpayers, went to other areas like Jackson Hole, which received a big chunk of them. This sort of thing is a drain on our tax base. It's unsustainable. We have to find ways to make California more affordable. One of those ways is less taxes. The gasoline tax, for instance, makes California the highest tax gasoline state in America. We are overtaxed in this country. During this gas spike, when gasoline prices spiked over $6 a gallon, the legislature raised gas taxes. Does anybody think that's a good idea, raising taxes at a time when we're already over $7 a gallon? So we can reduce taxes and reduce some of the outflow of citizens to this, from the state.
Thank you. The next question will be directed first to Mr. Jacobson. A proposal on the November ballot would amend the LA County Charter and grant the Board of Supervisors authority to remove by a supermajority vote an elected county sheriff who violates the law or abuses power. Some people say that county sheriffs in California should be appointed rather than elected. However, making that change would likely require a state constitutional amendment. Would you be in favor of such an amendment? And in general, what actions would you propose to improve the accountability of the state's county sheriffs? Mr. Jacobson, your 2-minute response, please.
Well, the first thing I would say is that the county sheriffs throughout the country are the last line of defense for our liberty. They are elected by the citizens. That's where they're accountable. They aren't appointed by politicians like the police chiefs are. I'm against any measure that would take that away from the citizens of that county and put it in the hands of a handful of board members. So, you know, I'm completely against that. I think it's a wrong-headed move. Again, the sheriffs are our last line of defense, and if anything, their autonomy should be bolstered. We, the citizens, hold them accountable. We're the ones they answer to, not to a board of oversight that is appointed by a handful of politicians. That kind of thing just lends itself to corruption and to cronyism. So no, I'm not in favor of it. I think it's a terrible idea.
Thank you. Ms. Friedman, your 1-minute response, please.
Well, I think that it's an interesting question in general about whether boards and legislatures and city councils should be able to remove even members of their own boards and commissions in the face of malfeasance, and it's probably something that should be addressed in a charter. I certainly think that if there's proof of criminal wrongdoing, a sheriff should be able to be removed. I think if there's proof of malfeasance of a certain level, of leveling of harassment of people who disagree with them using their official power, that would be grounds of removal. And I think that if you write a ballot measure in such a way that it's extremely limited and really capturing serious malfeasance, I would support it. And I would support it in charters for city council members, for legislatures, because somebody, the voters only get to vote every 4 years for most of these offices. And if someone's doing something that everybody recognizes is seriously wrong, particularly if they're in a position to arrest people, there needs to be accountability within that time frame.
Thank you. The next question will be directed first to Ms. Friedman. What do you believe are the 3 most important issues facing the state of California at this time, and what would you propose legislatures do to address them? Ms. Friedman, your 2-minute response, please.
Okay, I would say, first of all, climate change, because that is going to affect everything. It's affecting our water supplies. We see the extreme heat that we're facing, and that's deadly. We see that we have parts of the state that are going to be hard to even live in. We see what's happening to our crops. I talk to farmers who say they literally can't grow certain crops anymore that they were able to grow 10 years ago because our climate has changed so much. We see what's happening with sea level rise. I was supposed to be taking Amtrak, as I always do, from San Diego to Los Angeles when I'm going down for a tour. And guess what? Amtrak's not running because the tracks are literally falling into the ocean right now because of erosion. And we're going to be expecting a much more drastic sea level rise that's going to be trillions of dollars of impact to our major cities that are along the coast. So we're seeing the beginning of that crisis. It's only going to get worse. That's something that keeps me awake at night. I would say after that, our homeless crisis. It is beyond anything that I've seen in my lifetime, and it's something that, again, we can't normalize. And we have to put all of our resources into stemming this tide, getting people off the streets, and making sure that we set up a way of living that doesn't allow this kind of crisis to happen again. And then the cost of living, and particularly the cost of housing. I would say our housing crisis, which feeds directly into homelessness, is a 3rd huge crisis in Los Angeles County. It's something that is driving people away. I've had businesses who left, major businesses, point to housing as the only reason, not taxes. I have talked to businesses about this. It's not taxes for most of them. It's actually the cost of housing for their employees. They can't keep and retain employees for the price they can pay because the cost of living, particularly housing, is too high in Los Angeles.
Thank you. Mr. Jacobson, your 1-minute response, please.
That's a lot to cover in 1 minute. First of all, crime and homelessness are the top issues, without a doubt. TJ Maxx just closed down in Sherman Oaks, not because of housing problems for their employees. They closed down because it's now legal in California, essentially, to steal. You can walk in at a store, take $900 worth of merchandise, and walk out. Gangs are entering our stores, smash and grab rings, as we know they're called. And it's impossible for a brick and mortar store to stay in business when gangs can walk in and just loot their store at will. So crime is a big one, and homelessness is the other big one. Our state has become an increasingly dangerous place to live, with mentally ill people literally walking our streets. At times on our neighborhood, it's like Night of the Living Dead with people walking around. We've actually named our homeless people. There's Machete Man, there's Crowbar Man, as they walk the streets at night, and there's nothing we seem to be able to do about it. We haul tons of garbage out of our neighborhood every month, just from the homeless encampments in Toluca Lake.
Thank you. The last question will be directed to Mr. Jacobson. Why are you running for the State Assembly, and what do you believe distinguishes you from your opponent? Mr. Jacobson, your 2-minute response, please.
So I was born and raised in this district. I was born and raised in the San Fernando Valley. I left to serve my country, the U.S. Army. I served in Special Forces for 10 years, fighting communism, mostly abroad during the Cold War. I'm a business owner. I own a business in Beverly Hills. And it's become increasingly difficult for someone to raise a family in California. Our state is becoming a national joke, a cautionary tale for bad governance. In 2020, Patty and I had to make a decision. Are we going to stay in the state, or are we going to do like so many others, and are we going to flee? I decided to stay and fight. And I looked at what was going on in Los Angeles, not just Los Angeles, but the state, and so many of the things that are making it unlivable are just bad policy, just wrong-headed, stupid policies coming out of Sacramento. So my goal is to try to turn the state around and make it once again the place that I grew up in, a place that people come to for opportunity. The Golden State, as it once was, it used to be the place to be, and now it's become the place to flee. We got to put an end to that.
Thank you. Ms. Friedman, your 1-minute response, please.
Thanks. Well, I came to Los Angeles in 1992 to work in the film industry after working in New York, and I never thought I was going to be in politics. But when I bought my house in Glendale in 2000, I started getting involved in local politics, went on a city commission for 5 years, and then decided to run for Glendale City Council, and found the changes that I was able to make and the projects I was able to work on changed my community. And it's just the greatest feeling to see something that you worked on become alive in your community and make a difference in people's lives. I worked on the Central Library around the corner, and seeing what we were able to turn that library into gives me joy every single time I drive past it. And in Sacramento, it's amazing to be able to work on policy that I know is going to benefit my own daughter. You know, I think about her, I think about the California that she's inheriting, I think about all the challenges that we have, and I feel like the thing I can do best, you know, to leave any kind of legacy is to try to make the world better for her and everybody else who lives here.
Thank you. The candidates will now have 2 minutes each for their closing statements. Ms. Friedman, your closing statement, please.
Thank you, and again, thanks to the League, and I want to thank my opponent for running and for being in the race and for his service. For the past 5 years, it's been the greatest honor of my life to be able to represent all of you in the State Assembly. I am really proud of the work that I've been able to accomplish. I've had the opportunity to work on some of California's toughest challenges, things like homelessness and climate change, transportation, education, public safety, and our economy. And all of that has been amazing to be able to work with people from across the state, on both sides of the aisle, from rural districts and urban districts, from Northern California and Southern California. But I also want to say that my work has gone beyond the legislature, because during the COVID crisis, my office helped over 1,500 people access their EDD claims and other COVID relief. And so I know from my work in local government, you know, through working in Sacramento, how important it is to stay connected with your community. And I work with my community face to face every single day. I'm out in the community, I'm talking to people, I'm talking to residents and hearing their feedback. And I have now been in elected office since 2009, and I use all of that experience every day to dialogue with all facets of the community to work on those challenges. And I do believe that with all the challenges we have in California, the only way that we're going to succeed in tackling them is together. It's with people who vote, it's with people who pay attention, it's with people who hold forums, people who go to their homeowners association meetings. And I have extensive experience working with everybody, and it's been a pleasure. And I also want to say that I've been able to work on things like traffic safety and water resources, and I love coming into this race with the support of our nurses, our firefighters. I have the support of law enforcement in our district. I have the support of our city council members, and it's having that close connection and that dialogue with the community that's made me successful and made me efficient, and I would be, you know, nothing more than honored to continue this work, to represent and work with all of you. Thank you.
Mr. Jacobson, your closing statement, please.
Thank you. The state's ruling elites, which have ruled Sacramento since 1970, want us to believe and accept that scarcity and shortages are the new normal. But this is America, and any competent government should be able to keep the power on during heat waves and the water flowing during dry spells. The problem is that we left it up to the lawyers, the lobbyists, and the politicians for too long. California has become a dirty, decaying, and frankly, unpleasant place to live. There's more to a clean environment than just less carbon in the air. How about less garbage on the streets? California used to be the place to be. Now it's become the place to flee. IRS data shows that in 2020 alone, our state lost 260,000 taxpayers to other states. 2021 continued the trend with 117,000 more lost. This, along with a state debt that as of yesterday stood at $500 billion. And the total debt, including pensions, may actually be much, much worse. This is not sustainable, and it doesn't need to be this way. I want to see a cleaner, safer, healthier California. And you have my personal commitment to work tirelessly to make that happen. Frankly, it's time to retire just one more career politician by returning Laura Friedman to private life. I fought for you in the Cold War as a special forces operator, and I'm ready to fight for you in Sacramento. And I'm asking you to send a businessman, a job creator, father, proven fighter to do battle against the lobbyists and special interests. Together, we can rebuild California and make it once again the Golden State. Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes our candidate forum. Our thanks to the candidates and the volunteers for your participation. in today's forum. We're also grateful to Brian Halloran, Broadcast Coordinator, Glendale TV, and his staff for their valuable support in making this event possible. Please be sure to vote, whether in person or by mail, so that your ballot is received or postmarked by November 8th. Thank you.